when the younger generation comes into the company, then that's really when this inorganic concept really comes into play. They're literally taking the private equity playbook and doing a lot of business, corporate development, roll-up strategies.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. Welcome back to the Industrial Growth Institute podcast, where we try to weave together different threads of business growth for industrial manufacturers. Often that means we're talking about organic growth with existing products or new product development. Periodically, we look at inorganic growth. And today we're going to, I think, look at a different flavor of it all. I'm not sure what we may call it in the end, but I'm looking forward to a conversation. And joining me today to help us together take that journey of discovery is Belinda Ephraim. Belinda focuses on what she calls deep tech. I'm definitely going to have to get a clearer understanding of her definition of what deep tech is as we talk. But she brings a really interesting background. She's the managing general partner at TENSEUR Capital, which is a young VC firm where she's raising her first round to invest exclusively in scientific breakthroughs across energy, earth, life, materials, security, and space. Sounds like that covers about everything. We'll find out more. Belinda is also the host of the Neo Industrial podcast, which is how I met her. She explores the complex interplay between scientific innovation, industrial transformation, and human-centered technologies. In both of those roles, she draws on her background as an investment banker and her experience in structuring over $37 billion in Wall Street transactions, and also as an entrepreneur founding a personal care manufacturing startup. She brings a really rare combination of financial expertise and scientific curiosity, along with a contrarian approach that challenges what you might think of as conventional venture capital models, embracing longer 15-year horizons to properly nurture technologies and bring that transformative potential of technologies to market. She was recognized as a 2024 Leader of Influence in Finance by the Los Angeles Business Journal. She holds an MBA from Babson Graduate School of Business, and she also brings the additional perspective, kind of if you believe that having a broader set of interests can enhance somebody's business effectiveness. She's a certified holistic nutrition coach and a mindfulness practitioner. So be sure to hit the bell to like this episode as we get started, and please join me in welcoming Belinda. Thanks for being with us today, Belinda.
Ed, I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So let's start. Deep tech. What is deep tech?
Well, I like to think of deep tech as a science, rooted in science. Whereas a lot of people think tech startups, that could be software, enterprise SaaS, crypto, gaming. The way I look at deep tech is really the scientific and engineering foundation that, now pioneers technological innovation. So we are a broad spectrum industrial deep tech VC firm. So we're not siloed, for example, maybe healthcare. We look across the board because we like to think of ourselves as generalists, but specialists. So I'm a non-PhD investor, but I really do have the scientific curiosity because I grew up in a household where my father was a civil engineer and my mother was a geologist specializing in botany, so plant sciences, and really just working within like systems and frameworks within the family household is just something that has really shaped my experience. So even though I have this strong financial credibility, and expertise, I really enjoy science and how science moves the world forward, how science can really be disruptive in reshaping industries. And so that's really where I'm positioned to play. So we're currently raising our first fund. And we're looking to raise about $50 million so that we can deploy larger check sizes into these startups just because of the natural progression, which is lengthy and long and complex when it comes to getting them from lab to commercialization and scaling these businesses.
So science is fundamentally important to what you do. I was at an interesting conference the end of last week where several speakers made the point that they think we've kind of had to blow off top in experts, and science will henceforth support humanity rather than dictate to humanity how things are going to operate. So starting off kind of at a big philosophical level, what's your reaction to that?
You know, Ed, when I think about the future, because you almost have to play the part of a futurist in order to understand an opportunity when it shows up. And so when I think about the future of the planet, because these companies are going to be creating revolutionary type technologies, we are forecasted to be, I think, about 10 billion people plus on this planet. So that's an additional 3 billion people, plus the current challenges that we are facing. So when I look at the world, that's sort of where I try to operate from, and then backtrack and say, okay, what are the current technologies that are actually causing a lot of disruption today, now, such as AI? And because of that acceleration, see, unlike the internet, when the internet first came online, to the masses, it took over a decade to really gain its legs. But what we are seeing here with AI is that AI, almost every 3-6 months, there are these technological advancements. And with those technological advancements, the very structure that the internet was founded on is not going to be able to handle the progress of AI. So, which is why now people are starting to look at infrastructure, the infrastructure of IT. And so, because if we don't get that right, whether that's data centers, whether that's maybe figuring out a different way to cool our data centers, whatever those technologies are, the semiconductor chips that used to be used in our PCs, our phones, our medical equipment, all that has to change. So the very foundational bedrock of technology is changing. And I feel that if you are a business owner, doesn't matter whether you call yourself a startup or, entrepreneur, a C-suite executive, if you're not aware, or maybe you are aware, but you're ignoring these shifts because
nobody does that, do they?
You might be surprised. A lot of people believe that change is what is it? Is it's a constant? It's like, nothing ever changes in your world. Right. And so, but that cannot be the case anymore. And so how are you going to disrupt? How are you going to innovate with these new technologies? And AI is just the tip of the iceberg. There is quantum computing that's going to come, and that is really going to even fuel AI even more. So
and potentially disrupt all our passwords.
It's going to be, if we think we are in a disruptive environment right now, right, once quantum comes online, that's even going to be, and everything that we're building right now can change. Because
what about technologies that have established a foothold but still seem to have enormous potential, like 3D printing in the industrial manufacturing space? 3D printing seems to hold such enormous potential and it's making very gradual progress, but somehow hasn't quite cracked the code, at least in my estimation, from my perspective. Do you
Yeah.
anticipate that these other supplementary technologies are going to go back and help some of these longstanding technologies that have moved slowly suddenly accelerate as well?
I believe so. The thing with 3D printing is that you have to consider the materials component to 3D printing, right? So if we don't really have access at scale to these materials, and maybe these materials are actually being sourced from one country and then exported to another country, for example, extraction of minerals from the continent of Africa across the continent of Africa, and then being exported out to Europe, India, China to be used in this manufacturing 3D processes, and we don't control that, then I think that's probably where we're seeing that slow growth and that slow movement. But
But
I believe,
maybe we've also got the opportunity to, instead of progressing in a linear way. I mean, I spent a lot of time
mm,
in India, and when I was in India, one of the things that was very clear to me was that instead of installing landlines everywhere, which they simply couldn't do, they didn't have the infrastructure, wasn't going to happen. Everyone would get mobile phones, and in fact, everyone got multiple mobile phones in case the one tower or network or whatever was down. There's a lot of interesting stuff about AI, particularly drug discovery, where they're essentially creating new molecules. I mean, it strikes me that if we go back to the 3D printing example, maybe the material scientists can use AI in ways to come up with completely new materials that are much more suitable for 3D printing and offer many of the same or even enhanced performance characteristics. It feels like that's where they start to intersect.
bingo. And that's what deep tech is.
Got it. All right. Well, I guess I needed you to help me explain it to myself, so I understood it. Thank you. All right. So you ran an investment banking firm for many years with great success. When I asked you recently why you were jumping from that to starting a venture fund, these are my words, not exactly your words, but what I think I heard you say was that you had become bored.
Yeah.
Most people are thrilled to have acquired the latent knowledge so that their work becomes easier. They can just kind of do things automatically. And you said, no, you were ready to break the mold. What drives that, what's the right word for it? Your kind of your impatience or your need to try new things?
You know what? I've been thinking about that lately, because I get asked that question a lot. So point of correction, I actually worked with SunTrust Bank and Merrill Lynch Capital over a period of time in investment banking. So the reason why I like to disrupt myself and learn is, first of all, I'm a lifelong learner. If I am not learning, if I am not growing, I actually mentally, physically, my body just doesn't work. My mind doesn't work. So I constantly have to challenge myself. And I think that comes from a couple of things. I'll probably start with my journey here to America as an immigrant. And so, when you've been disrupted out of your home country, and then you have to adapt, right? So you have to learn how to adapt to situations, to circumstances that either are in your control or outside of your control. And so I've always had that muscle built up over time. Some people will call it resilience. Some people will call it grit. But I think for me, it's just now honed so much into my system that if I am in a place, that's why I refuse to be a specialist, because once you put yourself in the bucket of a specialist, then it's very hard for you to actually be innovative and to disrupt,
Right.
because you're not looking at hexagonal type of industries, or maybe you could get an idea because Apple did something, or you could get an idea because Dole bananas, why are they always fresh and green and never they're never ripening, like physically in your, in front of your eyes. So you're like, okay, what are they doing? And in order to bring perishable fruit to market, but still it's not, it's not overripe, pretty much. So when I look at things that companies are doing or how the world operates, having this sort of generalist mindset allows me to sort of break the mold and question, and then I can make a decision what I want to do. So yes, I am very good with investment banking. I started my own manufacturing startup because I wanted to understand what it meant to take something from 0 to 1 and really get my hands dirty. I'm also very scientifically curious. And so that allowed me to actually work with a cosmetic scientist, teach myself. And, he taught me, he's actually a French cosmetic scientist. And so I was able to create proprietary formulas using the EU cosmetic standards, which are significantly better than the FDA cosmetic standards, and also create this company. So to build something from scratch is something I've always desired. And now I'm taking all of these experiences, so 25 years of career, of working, and now saying, okay, what am I going to do with this knowledge that I have? And how can I help other founders? And I really love this interplay of science, engineering, technology, again, because of my background, my experience. I've always had an analytical systems mindset. And so when I put all of that together, the industrial deep tech space really makes sense for me because throughout my entire career, I've always played in the industrial sector. So as an investment banker, Lockheed Martin, L3Harris, CSX, Dole was my client. Bacardi was a client. So agro-processors. You had mining, Florida Rock, venture, Vulcan Materials, Geldwen. So again, these are all very industrial companies. And
Right.
so when I look at how they could easily be disrupted, I want to be at the forefront of that movement. So that's why I started TENSEUR Capital, this venture firm that I am launching and fundraising for.
You mentioned grit. There's a lot of stories in the news lately about the hours that investment banking associates work. I think you started in the early 2000s, but you didn't start until you had 4 years working overnight at the Marriott after you had immigrated. You had to start somewhere, and that's where you started, and then worked all day after that, working on getting your degree at night. I assume that you are, what's the right way to say it? Skeptical of those who say that they're being asked to work too hard. Obviously, you've worked very hard over the years.
I say, let them. I'm going to do Mel Robbins here and say, let them do that. If that's what works for them, let them. But the reality of life is you really have to work hard. The idea that people expect someone, and I know he's not famous, he's not media friendly right now, or probably never has, but someone like an Elon Musk or someone like Toby, the founder of Shopify, this concept called founder mode, where you as the founder, even though you've reached a certain, pinnacle in terms of society's eyes, but you're still very much involved with your company. Those are the successful companies. So it's fine if you want to, work 40 hours a week, but I don't know if throughout my life, if I took that approach, that I would be where I am today.
I think I can say fairly confidently that you wouldn't be.
It wouldn't be. And I don't know anyone else who is lackadaisical in that approach and thinks that it's okay. Yeah, I don't understand that. And so, but I say if it works and the companies are willing to accommodate that kind of mindset, then great. But it's just, yeah, that doesn't even make any sense to me.
I assume that in the founders that you're looking to work with, one of the criteria is just kind of an obsessive work ethic because they believe so strongly in this technology they have.
Well, they have to, right? Because especially in deep tech, this is not enterprise software where you can, just whip up some code. And not to say it's not difficult, it is, but to whip up code, create an app or something, and then go sell it. With deep tech, it's very different. There's this verbiage called product market fit in the venture world. In deep tech, for me, the way I see it, it's actually customer market fit. The product actually is not the goal. So the customer pain point is the goal. I've actually started coaching some of the founders that I'm thinking about deploying capital into once we close our first round. And as part of that strategy is really saying to them, listen, this is not a product market fit. Okay, you're creating edge AI neuromorphic chips on a silicon bed. So these are like little tiny chiplets. And I could go into why this is actually revolutionary versus like our regular semiconductor chips. But when they first built it, they had the product, they had the market. And they said, okay, this is where we're going to go. This is where we're going to take this technology. The problem with that is you're not sure because it's so out of the current norm of what's being used right now. So you almost have to find the customer first, who then tells you, yes, this thing can help me. And then you go build the thing according to the pain point.
Yeah,
So
it's very easy with disruptive technology to be right and be so early that the company has no opportunity.
Exactly. And so how about we take this innovation and go out and find a beachhead customer who can actually tell you, yes, this is something that I need. And then you build it to that customer's pain point and you keep going deep into that pain point.
Right.
Because then once you're able to commercialize with that customer, then you've worked out the kinks. All of the regulatory requirements that are needed are actually, have now been mitigated. Your ability to now scale that technology into other industries or into other customers is now more disruptive, and you can actually scale for growth, not just in your competitive market, but globally.
And I tend to come at things from the marketing and sales side. And so I'm also thinking that an important part of that is companies tend to obsess about their technology. It's their baby. It's what they've given birth to. They imagined it. They experimented. They created it. And so that's what they want to talk about. But nobody cares about the technology. Nobody cares about the product. They only care about the business impact. And so we have to understand how to help prospects begin to ask the questions they should be asking, but they don't know to ask because this hasn't been there before, so that then we in turn can answer with our solution.
Yeah. Just back to this, to your point, I want to kind of tie in this startups experience. So when they first designed this chips configuration, they were planning on allowing it to be used in autonomous vehicles on the consumer level. So think Waymo, think, the Teslas, the electric vehicles. Because of the neural aspect of the edge AI technology in the semiconductors and how the chiplets are actually structured on the base, the motherboard. And they were like, no, we want to go with Ford and we want to go with GM. And we were like, well, I've listened to these companies, their annual, quarterly earnings calls. This doesn't seem to be a priority for them right now. So you're chasing something that doesn't even make sense for them right now. It's not a priority. And so it was really just educating and sort of shifting the mindset to, okay, who really is interested in what you're doing? Come to find out, defense. Oh, okay. Well, they have autonomous vehicles, right? Okay. So what are some of the challenges that they're experiencing with their autonomous vehicles that would make them interested in this technology that you're now bringing to market? And so the pivot And it's always good to be able to advise and assist founders in reshaping their thought process around this product market or customer pain point fit framework, and then saying, okay, how about this customer over here? And then them having that initiative to now go out and actually talk to that customer, define what that customer's pain point and how that technology could be used.
Right.
And that has actually started to really move the needle for them. They just recently won a CRADA for electronic warfare, which is important because now there are no more casualties, human casualties, involved. And now they can take these microchiplets that they have and embed them where they're more energy efficient and they're actually faster performance than probably some of the largest semiconductor chip makers in the market.
Maybe you should have made your
now.
investment before they got that contract.
Well, I've already received a pre-allocation in the seed round. So that's sort of the way that we are building our pipeline while we are fundraising with these companies.
All right. Before we get too far ahead, I want to understand you coming to the U.S. We've compared notes on some of my adventures in Abuja and Lagos and elsewhere in Nigeria. I told you I used to carry a 234 phone number for several years. So I kind of understand a bit, but tell me about that journey, why you came to the U.S., why Florida, et cetera.
Oh, Ed, this will have to be another podcast episode, I think.
All right, the short version.
But I will shorten the storyline. Growing up in West Africa, I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria, West Africa, and attended secondary school. My father was a civil engineer in oil and gas, and like I said earlier on this episode, and he actually received investment to start a building products manufacturing company in West Africa that would export across West Africa and into Europe. His suppliers were across the board, China, Europe, and also Africa as well. And growing up, we had a home in the Florida Keys at the time, and so we would always, for family vacations, travel. So I've kind of consider myself being raised on 3 continents and having lived in, I think, 15 cities.
Wow,
at counting. And so that is sort of my background. And due to a political regime change that happened, everything had to get shut down, and my parents had to flee the country to America at the time. Well, number one, because they had their home here, and number two, because I was actually sent here to America to study in my university. And so since both of those things were here, that's what made them decide to come to America anyways. So that's kind of like the first leg of my journey. But then I had to drop out of school in order to help my family. And so that's when I started working at the Marriott's. I had 3 jobs working in the same hotel. So which was a smart thing because then I could just quickly shift and I was still in the same uniform and it didn't really matter. It took less time to commute. And then from there, I actually decided to go back to school. I found one job now working as a financial advisor, as a wealth management analyst, and then went to school at night while I was working during the daytime.
And then you got into investment banking before you got your MBA. How'd you do that?
So I got into investment banking because at the time that I was a wealth management analyst, I remember this was during the time of the AOL Time Warner merger. And, again, talking about the internet, and tech. And I was very fortunate that at the time that I came to this country, and I think this is something I always remind myself of, is that I came at the right time. I came during the nascent phase of the internet when, it was CompuServe, it was a black box, little square with the green blinking icon. and you had to actually code in order to access the internet, right? So I'm very blessed that I came in at that time, because I think it's really what enabled me to really grow my career compared to like maybe other predecessor immigrants that have come into this country, that maybe at the time that it came, the internet wasn't a thing. So they really had to work extremely hard. Not to say I'm not working hard, but they really had to work harder physically. Mm-hmm. Whereas with me, I have to work harder using my brain and using the tool that I have access to. So that merger was playing in the background. It was iconic. And all I remember saying to myself was, I want to be those guys. That's it. I didn't know what investment banking was. I didn't even know what they were called. I was just like, wow. And everyone was glued to their TV watching, the regulatory things they had to overcome. It was just spectacular at the time. And so when I went to school, I was like, okay, I know I want to do finance. I want to be an investment banker. And that was pretty much it. And so that was a path that I took. So that's what made me decide to major in finance. And I went to the University of Florida, finally, after graduating from community college. And then even while at UF, again, I don't have a safety net in this country. So I still had to work nighttime. Right. So now I flipped the dynamic, went to school, 8 a.m. to whatever time, went home, slept, because then at night I had to work at Shan's hospital, which was a trauma level 1 hospital, and it's a teaching hospital. And I did that for 2 years, and then I graduated, which I think sometimes was a miracle, because I didn't have an investment banking internship, which is usually the path.
Right.
But I knew what I wanted. And so what I did was I reached out to SunTrust Bank, because they were the only bank that had an investment banking division in the Southeast region at the time. No other investment bank was recruiting in the Southeast, right? They were all like New York. So you had to go to New York to intern.
Right.
And I didn't have that privilege. And so I said, okay, who recruits here? Because they were recruiting in the Southeast region mostly for wealth managers. And I was kind of like done with that already. I gained what I needed to know, and I knew I wanted to be an investment banker. So what I did was I reached out to a recruiter, and I wrote a really beautiful letter. And I said, listen, this is my situation. I'm not privileged enough to have an internship. I cannot afford to take 6 months out of my summer to go to New York. I have no money. But I said, this is what I want to do. Please, when you come to campus, would you consider, I know you're interviewing for XY, because, the positions. Right. I know you're interviewing for this, but can you please interview me for an investment banking position? And she said, yes. And that was it. And that's how I got into investment banking without going the true and tried country club, who you know route. Right. I just pretty much asked for it. When she came, she interviewed me. I was the only person in the entire school she interviewed for that position.
Wow.
And I almost didn't get it. It wasn't until maybe, because, a lot of people want to work in New York at the time. So they received those offers finally, and then they kind of let go of SunTrust Bank, because it was a regional bank. And so that's how I got into investment banking.
And then after working several different jobs, including with Siemens Finance, which I didn't realize Siemens had an investment banking arm, but then you found your way up to Boston and you got your MBA at Babson, you did Mass Challenge, you were bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. I assume that's when you started your cosmetics business as part of the Business Challenge?
Yes, absolutely. I was the student lead. So Mass Challenge, for those who are listening, was an accelerator, or is an accelerator in the Boston downtown area and across the Boston community. And Babson at that time was really trying to be and this was during Leonard Schlesinger's presidency at Babson, was really about this entrepreneurial thought and action. And so they partnered with Mass Challenge to create something called the Babson Hatchery, where Babson startups or entrepreneurs would actually partner with Mass Challenge, access to their resources, access to co-working space. And just it really allowed me to kind of talk with other entrepreneurs that were part of the Mass Challenge accelerator on their own, as well as kind of like collaborate with a lot of the Babson startups that were coming up at that time. So yeah.
And no stranger to making bold decisions. At that point, once you got your MBA, then you set up your own boutique banking firm, right?
Yeah. So once I got my MBA, I went back to New York. I did a little bit of real estate because the markets were still, no one was really hiring at the time. And so I got my real estate license just to kind of kick the tires. And I also wanted to learn sales. I had never sold anything before, and I was like, well, I have my analytical mindset. I know how to analyze real estate, but I've never sold anything. So I'm going to sell the most difficult thing in New York City. And so I did that while I was still trying to figure things out. And then I got into infrastructure finance. So, financing and underwriting, the build out of highways, affordable housing, but in the emerging markets. And so that actually gave me a little bit more global exposure in my repertoire along my career path. And so that's, what led me to now say, okay, and because of that, because of working in affordable housing and also hospitality projects that were being built in emerging markets, it led me to actually get into hospitality. And then I got into hospitality and they were like, well, you're not a hospitalist. It's like, oh, I don't know what that means. But I was like, I did, clean floors and I was a banquet caterer, but, that was however many years ago. But I am very familiar with the hospitality industry. And so they actually started me out as an analyst. So I had to take a major step back to enter that industry. But I would tell you, Ed, by the time I was done 5 years later, I was a chief revenue officer. So I think I want to tell that story because a lot of people assume that because in life, you might have to start over again and that it is okay. Because when you have the experience, and this is where the hard work muscle comes into play. If you look at life and you expect that you should only work 40 hours a week and be given a 6-figure income, and then life throws you a curveball,
right.
I will guarantee you that you would not be able to withstand the challenge that is in front of you.
Curl up on the floor and feel sorry for yourself.
Correct. And then that's when the mental health issues start because you've not, really taken the time to exercise the muscle, the brain to say, you know what?
Resilient.
For 50 hours, 60 hours. I was working, some weeks I worked 80 hours.
Right. All right.
So anyways, but yeah.
So now VC, where does the name TENSEUR come from?
So tenseur is the French word for tensor. And tensor is, again, I'm not a scientist or engineer, so I'm probably going to even blunder this, but it's really about the algebraic expression of friction. And, everything is algebra, I guess, in science, engineering. And so when there's the tension, the between the algebraic expressions, and that really is tensor. So the full name of the company is actually TENSEUR Capital Vector Collective. So,
got it. And along the way, I think maybe a year ago, you launched a podcast. What prompted that?
I wanted to have intelligent conversations. I think that's when I realized. So when I first moved, so after I was done with my startup, I wound it down. I decided to start up an M&A practice. But I realized I wasn't having two things. I realized two things. I wasn't really having intelligent conversations. And the second is that my network, I have a very strong network of founders versus established, baby boomers in my network. And so there was this, I felt like I was walking two worlds, right? So my network are founders. They all came from Harvard, Penn, Yale, INSEAD. Then they all went to work for PwC, the top four accounting firms, top four investment bankers. They all work for Tesla, they work for NASA, they work for Raytheon. So the conversations I was having was very different from when I would now start to switch to working with, small, medium-sized, lower middle market type companies. And there was this huge disconnect for me. Mm-hmm. And so I founded the podcast to sort of try to attempt to bridge that chasm for me. But and then I think during those conversations is really what helped me refine where I wanted to play. And I realized that being an M&A advisor was not what I wanted to do because it didn't give me joy, because I really wasn't really tapping into my network and the people that I want to have intelligent conversations, especially around, again, I'm a disruptor. I disrupt my life, right? Especially being an immigrant in this country. Right. So I'm wired for that. So there was a huge disconnect for me.
So you've sourced some interesting guests, I guess, from that network. A lot of them have those Ivy League, MBA sort of backgrounds, the big consulting firm, big accounting firm background, and their founders. When you have one of those folks on your podcast, what are you hoping the insight is they're going to deliver for your audience?
So Ed, as you know, you've been a guest on my show, and
I'm wondering which of those buckets of contacts you put me into.
The experts. I put you in as the expert because here's the thing I'm realizing. So when I look at my founder profile, they're actually over the age of 35. And it's not intentional, but I'm finding that, especially with deep tech, a lot of these are seasoned experts, right? So they're coming from Teslas. Tesla is not perfect. Raytheon is not perfect. None of these companies are. So there are loopholes that they're not seeing in terms of innovation. Now, these young people still, but, they're not Gen X, they're not Gen Zers yet. They're Gen Xers and millennials. Because they've worked, they have a bit of savings, right? So they are more willing to do the work to get to proof of concept. Whereas just coming in with the idea or the scientific idea. So we don't invest in the idea stage. Right. We actually require proof of concept, something tangible that has been vetted through sweat and hard work. And then that's the kind of capital that we will now come in. So we're finding that our founder profile is 35 on average. Did that answer your question?
Not entirely. So thinking about when you have a guest on your show, you explained that part of what your show does is helps you think through topics through those conversations, but presumably there's something that you want to extract from them or help them elucidate for the audience so the audience has a meaningful experience.
Okay. So, thank you for reminding me about that question, Ed. So the way I approach my podcast is I always think there's genius in people, right? And a lot of times I don't give my questions. So in other words, my podcast is not scripted, as you know. I might give general categories of topics because I'm finding that when I allow the person to breathe a little bit, so a lot of my podcast episodes are an hour long plus, right? So when I allow them to breathe a little bit into their genius, that's when the elucidation I'm probably mispronouncing this, but I mispronounce my words because I try to use American phonetics, but then I struggle with my accent. So that's why sometimes I might mispronounce words. But that's where the genius comes into play because I allow it to breathe. And then I just ask random questions. And then that's sort of like how I like to approach it because then the conversation is authentic.
Right.
And it really allows my guests to bring their best self.
Incidentally, I realize that you're much more circumspect in your online posts than I am. You're able to mine my post for some potentially problematic things I had written in the past and kind of hit me between the eyes with. Unfortunately, I was comfortable with everything. You're much more reserved.
Like when I'm a podcast host.
No, when you're posting online.
Oh yes. I think I have nothing. I am very opinionated, but I've also learned that it's okay to not always be that opinionated without it, because a lot of people I'm finding are very easily offended, because it's really about how they feel and their rightness.
So let's offend somebody. What's the most controversial business position that you hold right now?
Oh boy. Should we talk about tariffs?
Okay.
Is that one? Is that something that you could talk about?
Sure.
Listen, with the tariffs, with what's going on right now, let me preface this by saying I haven't had a TV in my home in over 20 years. And because I've boldly chosen not to be influenced by the media. And it allows me to think things through critically. And so the first question with everything that's going on with the tariffs, and I'm the kind of person where, and maybe because of the upbringing that I had and the political issues that we had growing back, when you live in a country with militants, governments that are corrupt, and you have to watch your parents navigate that, and you have to navigate that. And then when you come to this country and you see the benefits, it's not perfect, but it's definitely better, right? And so I look at things pragmatically from that perspective. So fine, okay, we have these tariffs. Everyone's up in arms, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. But is this the first time that we've had tariffs like this? Do you know what I mean? Like, is this, I think, wasn't it in the early 1900s where there were actually even steeper tariffs than what we're currently seeing? So those are the kind of questions I ask myself. Number one. Then I say, okay, number two, what happened during COVID? COVID was almost what we're seeing with tariffs, but it wasn't tariffs per se. It was a virus, and it upended a lot of businesses, including those that have large supply chains, right? So if what happened during COVID, and I know it's not the same, but just hear me out for a second. If your supply chain, if you manage to survive COVID-19 as a business owner, especially in the industrial sector, where you have supply chain issues, you have manufacturing, you have labor issues. And that really did a double whammy for a lot of businesses. And you managed to survive. You should have, at some point, figured out a way to make your business resilient against those kind of external regulatory type of nature of God kind of events. If then you were not able to bring in your products from China in 2020, then this is just 4 or 5 years ago. So we're not talking 20 years ago. This is just very recently. And you're now struggling to figure out how this is going to impact your business. Then I have sympathy, but I don't have sympathy, because I think it's something that should have been thought about. Like, how can we disrupt ourselves to not have to, in other words, how can we build our business to incorporate the possibility of disruption, whether that's regulatory, or I can't make any more acquisitions past this size, or my supply chain. Okay, I need to find manufacturers here in the US. Okay, they're not here, or maybe they don't go to scale. How about maybe working with them to actually go to scale? I don't know what the problems are, and they're numerous, but I also know that there are businesses out there that actually are thriving.
You also know that there are going to be problems. And so whether you're doing it intentionally disrupting your business model or tabletops or whatever the case may be, at least thinking through. I mean, Eisenhower said that the plan may have little value, but the process of planning has enormous value.
God, yes, that's it. And a lot of, and so that is really what kind of, that's my opinion, that I probably will not put on social media.
All right. Well, we'll see. When I put it into Opus, if it clips that piece out, maybe it will be on social media.
Maybe.
All right. Let's talk about growth. Let's shift to this conversation of growth, and something that I think ultimately is kind of at the intersection of your banking and your VC efforts. And for context, I'd say lower and middle market industrial manufacturers, in my experience, don't often think of inorganic growth as an option. Certainly companies in that size range, if they're sponsor owned, if it's a platform, they go into it expecting that. But, that family owned business that was started 50 years ago that's still owned by the family, typically they don't. So what's your advice for, say, $50 or $100 million privately held, family owned industrial manufacturing regarding corporate development?
So a couple of things. You could either buy the companies, the tech startups, or you could partner with them, or you could build your own capabilities internally. But oftentimes, to your point, it doesn't make sense to build it internally because that's not the company's wheelhouse, right? And so they either have to buy and or partner. And in those situations, I think it's very important for the company to really understand what they're good at and what they're not good at. Corporate development for privately held companies is actually a critical factor to, and a smart way to increase enterprise value, especially when you've hit that plateau and you're trying to innovate or you're trying to enter a new market.
Then why don't boards and families and executive teams think about it more often? Or am I wrong? Am I just not hearing the conversations and they're all thinking about how to do that?
So Ed, as you know, we can have $100 million business that doesn't even have financial records, right? Like, we know this in our work. So if they don't even have audited, if they don't even take the initiative, because for whatever reason, to audit their financials maybe once a year, and create a professionalized company, then it's going to be very hard to have that conversation about disruption, about corporate development, because the very fundamentals, the very business fundamentals that are needed are just not there, even though they're making $100 million in revenue. So it really takes a mindset shift and the ability to be open. So if you've built your company around that, to be constantly on the lookout for innovation, not just organically, but it's okay. You know what? We feel we've tried everything. I always say, take your pain point, that company that really wants to expand and really tap into what startups are doing, is to find a pain point within the company that you've not been able to resolve. And then try to find a solution out there. And I feel like the startup connection with these medium-sized businesses needs to come together. I know a lot of people will say, well, startups, I don't want to work with them because they're always asking for equity. And it's interesting because I actually have a story. There's this second generation electronics contract manufacturer. She just inherited the business from her father. And again, with the tariffs, with what's going on, that's really causing a lot of friction in her business. The beautiful thing is she actually is now partnering with tech startups that are actually looking to say, hey, listen, we need help prototyping. We will pay you because we're venture backed, right? We have the capital, we have access to capital, but we need you to help us sort of like create, like just low scale type of product that we can actually demo and use, with the potential that could actually be additional business. But for her, she says to me, she's like, you know what? I never really thought that I would be doing this.
Right.
She goes, but I've now had to really start to rethink, what could my business model be, instead of me chasing after the larger, accounts, collaborate with these startups to help, contract manufacture whatever electronic thing they need. And then if that relationship is now built in, and when they're ready to actually scale, then I'm right there with them. And so how can businesses be open to that agility when it comes to their business?
So it feels like we're overlapping some topics. So let's take that Avatar, that $100 million industrial manufacturing firm, 50 years old, second generation operated. They could go and find a competitor or a similar company in a different geography, or an adjacent company with a technology they think they can sell to the same customer base, those kinds of things. And let's say they acquire a $20 or $50 million company and bolt it on. Now, they could also have their own internal R&D, with the idea that their own internal R&D is going to do new product development. They probably wouldn't set a 3M kind of a target where 30% of revenue comes from products that didn't exist 5 years ago. And often in that kind of company, my experience is that the R&D roadmap tends to be a product line extension, not disruption or innovation. So then where I'm thinking with your experience, maybe another way to look at it is, what if that $100 million company basically set up their own internal VC firm? I mean, many large companies do that routinely. And so how about if they set aside $1 million a year for a couple seed stage investments, maybe not even acquiring, but investing in these technologies, spreading their bets. Have you seen anybody in that middle market space doing that kind of thing?
No, but I know, I think it's HG Ventures. They're a privately held company, I believe. But no, it's not common. It's mostly publicly traded companies that are actually setting up their own VC funds. So the thing with that is, one has to be mindful, because a lot of times it's really, there could be a lot of misalignment with that. You might think, okay, we're going to use it so we can disrupt, but it almost becomes, it almost becomes misaligned with the company's strategic vision.
Okay,
moving forward.
So obviously something that the board and executive management and whoever's running that VC effort have to manage. How would you, if you were advising them, I mean, you're doing it yourself in some ways, if you were advising them on how to set that up and run it, what would the framework be that you would say they need to have to make sure that they're looking in the right kinds of places?
Well, I think it's giving room to invest in technologies that might be outside of their core business. Because I think a lot of times the corporate VCs tend to only invest within, so then it almost defeats the purpose of being disruptive and actually investing in innovative companies, because then it's almost limited to only what the company does.
Right.
And so there's no perspective on anything outside. So for example, if I have an agro processor client and they're like, okay, we want to form our venture capital fund, corporate VC, going to throw $100 million in there or 50 million, whatever the case may be. What tends to happen is they will only invest in the ag tech space, right? Like, but an ag tech company could be a biotech company. And again, I'm reaching here, but it's possible because of the, the ingredient element, what kind of technologies are out there that now our ingredients can play in. But because you're only looking at ag tech, then you sort of miss the point versus looking outside the periphery. So I think that's where the limitations of corporate VC can happen. And that's where that misalignment can occur, because then you're not really investing in truly disruptive technology that can actually disrupt the business itself. It's more like trying to bring in like a private equity playbook and do a roll up. And so then it's really not venture capital.
But of course, the culture could be, I mean, maybe it doesn't need to be disruptive, but it needs to be at least an adjacent extension, not just kind of their same product roadmap, but using that ag processing company. I mean, it could be blockchain for tracking back to the
Correct.
farm and organic certifications and things like that. So if they're primarily working in grains or processing grains, the other stuff could be really important, could grow very quickly, could have significant profit opportunity, and importantly, could help them get into accounts that they're not in with what they do every day. But it's not completely disconnected from what they do.
Correct. Yes. And I think that organizations' cultural readiness for change is also very critical to support that corporate venture capital arm that they're putting together. So then that way, there really is that discussion between the C-suite and the fund itself.
And if the executive team isn't pushing it, in your experience, is this something that the board should be stipulating?
Yes, but if I think it's both have to, because even if the board stipulates it, the C-suite still has to be involved.
Sure.
So yeah, it definitely has to be more holistically thought through. Corporate bureaucracy can really cause, and also the impatience too, because when you're talking about investing in blockchain, for example, that takes time, to flow through the verticalization of the business, for example. So a lot of times these organizations might have like short-term, which is kind of like the problem with CVC, is that there's that short-term sort of mindset, and it's it's really about nurturing long gestation, high risk innovations over time. So I think that could also be a disconnect.
So how do you find the technologies that you're working on?
I find them mostly through my network. So a lot of my pipeline right now is proprietary to my network. And so I tend to attract overlooked and under represented founders, whether female, male, that maybe don't fit that 1% Silicon Valley stereotype of, what a successful founder should be.
Mm-hmm.
And because again, I have that scientific curiosity, so I don't come in acting like I'm the expert. And again, I think this has just always been my approach is I'm like, hey, tell me about your technology. And I might have my opinion, but I think when I give the founder room to be able to explain that to me, and even though it doesn't fit the typical mold of, quick scaling, let's get this going, let's sell the company, let's invest and then sell the company in 3-5 years. Those are the things that I think about when I'm looking at companies and how it fits within the framework for where I want to play and where I see myself and my team of advisors helping them shape that strategy and that go-to-market piece.
And you must consume a lot of information across a lot of topics in order to have the framework to recognize something when it's relevant. What podcasts or YouTube channels or blogs do you subscribe to or particularly recommend as a good way to internalize a lot of the potentially disruptive technology changes that are going on?
So I read a lot actually, because I do use
because you're not watching TV.
Right, because I'm not watching TV. And I read a lot. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. So, but nothing, like I'm not intentional. Like, because I find that a lot of podcasts are great information, but sometimes it can be very what's trending, what topics are trending. And because of that, I try not to use podcasts as a arsenal in my toolkit. So I mostly read, and then I mostly look at news. I'll follow NVIDIA, Microsoft, just to see what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But then it allows me then I take a step back from all of those things. So the books, audiobooks, following the companies directly, people who are doing things out there. And I also have my Google alerts for certain keywords that I'm looking for. And then I take a step back. And so when I look at a company, I'm able to say, oh, I get it. I get it because of this experience, or I learned this. Tell me more about this because I was curious about it. I didn't understand it. Can you tell me how that fits in with your technology? And so then that allows the conversation to open up, and it allows me to see, okay, how can I not just only invest in this company at the seed stage, but now how can we actually help to create the moats around it from a strategic perspective? How can we help them create more network effects when it is the right time? How can we verticalize? I'm a big fan of verticalization. Outsourcing is great, but if you can verticalize most of your stuff, I think oftentimes you kind of create this sort of competitive moat around the company. So those will be the things that I'll start. Then that's when I'm going to start piecing this disparate pieces and talking with the founder to say, what are your thoughts on this? Is that something that you're thinking about? Yes, art. Oh my gosh.
How about
art
history? Do you expand to those areas to inform your analysis?
Yes. Art, history. Yeah, I do. Yes. I think even more so than, yes, art is history. I look at, I like to look at geology even sometimes, especially when it comes to clean tech. So I'm a very big believer in root cause thinking, or, trying to understand, okay, what's the root cause in order to fix something. So when I look at clean tech investments, I'm not even looking right now at, electric vehicles per se, or electric batteries or solar panels. Like, I'm looking more like, what is the earth doing? Like, I'll ask those questions because I'm like, okay, everyone says CO2 emissions are high. We have to get to net zero. But if we get to net zero, that means that we can't function as a society, as a human race.
Right. I'm more worried right now about the rapidly shifting North Pole, magnetic North Pole, that nobody seems to have figured out.
So exactly. So then I'm thinking, okay, if we take away all of the rhetoric around this idea that CO2 emissions is only generated by man, industry, planes, transportation, but the earth is doing a lot of things, right? The North Poles are shifting, tectonic plates are shifting, the ocean bed, something is going on there. So those are the kind of ticklers that I will sort of put in my periphery. And then I start to question, so what is the Earth's contribution to CO2 emissions? Then I start to ask those questions. And then it allows me to sort of really spot the right innovation because I've been thinking about the contrarian questions.
Or people that are asking the right questions are focused on the right things.
Right.
It may not even be the technology itself, but the way they're thinking about things gives you some insight.
It gives me some insight.
Speaking about the way you think about things, obviously you have an international perspective. From a manufacturing lens, I feel like the U.S. is in a pretty strong position right now. Do you agree? Are you only investing in the U.S.? Are you looking elsewhere?
From a manufacturing perspective, if you look at the U.S. Since the early 1900s to today, there's been this sort of split. I don't know how to explain like that, right? Where services, professional services are like this, and manufacturing is like this over time.
Certainly in terms of employment, to some degree in terms of the contribution to GDP.
Correct. So I'm talking specifically about contribution to GDP. And so if as a society, we're not producing our own goods, then there is that imbalance, which we're seeing obviously in the trade deficit. And I feel personally that American manufacturing really needs to be, there needs to be a resurgence around that. It doesn't really make sense that we have the IP, we have the know-how, and then we actually outsource the IP and the know-how to the point that it's actually very detrimental to us as a society.
Right.
And so I'm a big believer in the manufacturing in the US. If we are serious about what we're trying to do here, I think that we can definitely take that back and really become a much better society for it.
I think a lot of people agree. How do folks get in touch with you?
TENSEUR Capital, TENSEUR Capital.
I'll put that link in the show notes.
They can also find me on LinkedIn, but I actually want to shout out a couple of startups if people are interested in, just maybe reaching out to them directly or reaching out to me. There is another VC firm called Refashioned Ventures, and that's REFASHIOND Ventures. And they actually specialize in industrial transformation and supply chain. So all of those startup investments that they back are actually along this thread. And so I want to give a shout out to Diagon. Diagon, and I'll give you all of the links, Ed. But Diagon is a marketplace platform that works with manufacturers of batteries, so battery manufacturers, and sources the equipment, so the actual industrial fixtures.
Yeah, I looked at that while I was preparing for this, and honestly, thinking about my clients who sell machines, the idea of somebody trying to completely use basically an AI agent to acquire complex equipment with sophisticated capabilities is it's an interesting question. I tend to be biased. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it should work. I think companies will try it and be disappointed, but I could be selling it short.
Yes, but I do agree with you. However, they've actually been quite successful, really working with battery manufacturing equipment providers. So pretty much they actually have the relationships. So they procure, so it's almost like a human in the loop AI type of platform. And so they procure the manufacturing equipment, mostly sometimes new, but they also do sort of softly used equipment. And and that's really what they sell on the platform. This is actually a former Tesla executive that came from Tesla. Another one is the microchip Edge AI company that we are actually looking at. And they are Lola Vision Systems, and they are actually working mostly on the defense side of the business. Another one is Byte Data, because I know someone was looking for especially with the tariffs, right? Constantly changing, right? Sometimes they're 90-day extensions or 60-day extension. Prices are going up and down. And so they're actually a trade compliance landed cost calculator. And so they are doing that in real time to assist complex trade compliance questions, especially around tariffs. So, and that's BITE data. And lastly, Parsimony, which is it's a parts manufacturing supply chains in terms of efficiency gain. So let's say if you have a part you build on a motorcycle and there's a part that maybe with the tariffs are impacted, they actually have access to a database that can actually recommend a substitute part that can be sourced more efficiently across the globe. So those are the things that we're starting to see and really help drive the conversation to help businesses really get going in exploring some of these tools.
Yeah, give me those links and I'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah.
So help wrap us up. 3 minutes on how you would say middle market industrial manufacturers should think about inorganic growth and or growth by investing in new technologies.
Well, I think first is get the house in order. And assuming that the house is in order, these are options to definitely play, or should I say consider. I think a good company that does this really well that I follow on LinkedIn, I don't know them well, but they're called Nix Industries. So I think it's either like a second or third generation. And I'm finding that's probably where a lot of these companies is when the younger generation comes into the company,
right,
then that's really when this organic concept really comes into play. So I think it's like the new generation, however many year old, but Nix Industries, I believe is the name. And they're literally taking the private equity playbook and doing a lot of business, corporate development, roll-up strategies, but I don't know if they are really now taking a step back to say, okay, how can we actually innovate around this? And what does that look like? Should we now go and buy it, or should we figure out, maybe create a corporate VC in-house? And what does that look like? So I think it's all of those things definitely have to be in play. The willingness of the corporation on the C-suite level, on the governance level, from a board perspective, and also from the middle management, and trying to see how, because your people know what you should do, but a lot of leaders don't ask their people. They don't really think that the shop floor has the answers. And so sometimes it's really being able to have a communication channel that is really two-way. So then that way you're not making the wrong investments, even if you do decide to go and decide to grow your company inorganically.
Makes sense. Thanks for a great session, Belinda.
Thank you for having me, Ed. I really appreciate this.
My pleasure. And for everyone listening and watching, please give this episode a boost, like it, share it with a colleague, comment on something. And by all means, of course, I'd welcome you subscribing on your favorite outlet for listening or watching as well. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast.